We begin the current Daf from Mesechtas Megillah Daf Chavav. We begin on the bottom of Chafayim Beis, 2 lines up at the bottom of the Yommi, where we continue with the next parak in Mesechtas Megillah, the final parak B'nei Ha'ir, which begins a discussion regarding the continuing about the previous parak, which is discussing the Sefer Torah, about reading from the Sefer Torah, and other public things like davening with a minyan and Kriyas Torah, which were mentioned in the previous parak. Everyone is doing today's daf. Some of the things we're going to discuss in today's daf are the sanctity of the town square, basic knesses, many halachas pertaining to a shul, including basic knesses shel kfarim, krachim, depending if you're selling a shul from a village or a city, chilufa, zevuna, oigara, exchanging, selling, or renting out a shul, livni, the sanctity of bricks used in a shul or designated for use in a shul, and matana, giving the shul as a gift for private use. Whether they said Migdash, shuls, or homes in Yerushalayim were subject to the laws of Tzaras, which this might depend on whether Nischalka Yerushalayim l'Shvatim, if Yerushalayim was distributed to individual Shvatim or is owned by all of Klal Yisrael. And we discussed Tashmish and Mitzvah Kedusha, how to discard items used to perform a mitzvah or items used for Kedusha, which those have two different halachas. So we begin the current Daf Chavav, again Daf Chavheim Beis on the bottom. We start the final parak in Mesechtas Megillah, parak B'nei Ha'ir, which that's really the title of the parak, and that's really what it is. It's regarding the people of the city and items related to that of the public. It says the Mishnah, B'nei Ha'ir, members of the city, Shemachru Ruchli V'Shalir, they sell the town square, which has sanctity, as Gemara is going to explain, because they daven over there on tiniest on public fast, and Mamadis is debated. Tais says to take that out of the Girsa. Rashi ultimately explained why there would be sanctity because of Mamadis. We'll explain to the Gemara why would the town square have a sanctity, but it has a sanctity. So when they sell the town square, they have this whole privatization, they're all into like selling off everything, you just want to privatize everything. So you're selling it off. So from those proceeds, from those monies, you have to buy a shul. Because again, this has sanctity, this money, and you want to use it for something that even has a higher level of sanctity. Basic knesses, if you sell a shul, like in Teva, so you have to buy an Aron HaKodesh. The ark, Teva, you sell an aron, like a mitbachais, then you buy a mantle, which is the jacket covering for the Sefer Torah. Mitbachais, let's say you're selling the mantle, so it's getin tav chavav yichus svarim. Then you should purchase the actual scrolls of Nevi'im Ksuvim. Svarim, if you're selling the scrolls of Nevi'im Ksuvim, like in Torah, you buy a Torah with that. So every time you see, we're going higher in sanctity. But if you're selling a Torah, you can't buy Svarim Nevi'im Ksuvim, which is lower sanctity than that. Svarim, if you're selling Nevi'im Ksuvim, because you can't buy a mantle with that. Mitbachas, if you're selling a mantle, you can't buy an aron. Teva, if you're selling an aron, basic knesses, you can't buy a shul with that money. And basic knesses, selling a shul, you can't buy the town square with that, because as we all know, the concept of Mailam B'Kodesh B'Lim Redin. You have to always be elevating its area's sanctity and not downgrading. How do we know that? So Rashi brings Mailam B'Kodesh because it says V'Yoka Moshe as a Mishkan. Moshe erected the Mishkan, meaning B'Tzal made it. Moshe, who was greater than him, he erected it. And also we know Lo Meridin, which is the inverse. You cannot downgrade. That we know from Adas Kairach, where it says the pans of these sinners in their souls, which they made, they took those pans and they made them like plating for the Mizbeach, because once it was sanctity, it was sanctified, albeit by sinners, so it's already sanctified. You can't downgrade it, so they use it for the walls of the holy items. So therefore, you have to be always upgrading in areas of sanctity with those funds and not downgrading. And says the Mishnah, same thing goes for the leftovers. Let's say they sold Svan, and they purchased from some of the monies of Torah, so they upgraded. But what's with the leftover monies? Even that, says the Mishnah, you cannot buy even leftover monies something that's a lower sanctity. You always have to use all the funds for a higher upgrade of sanctity. So we said in the Mishnah, the opening halacha was, B'nei Ha'ir Shemachar Ruchli V'Shalir. Said if the people of the city are selling the town square, so he said you gotta upgrade the sanctity and buy a shul with those money. So and it says, this opinion of our Mishnah is Dibri Menachem Bar Yosi. It's the opinion of Menachem Bar Yosi Stumta, who's the anonymous one, which it's explicitly mentioned that the Sefer Megillah, that he's the one who said this teaching of our Mishnah. The sages, they disagree with the halacha of the Mishnah. They say, there is no sanctity in the town square. So the Gemara, yeah, that's a good question. Menachem Bar Yosi, my time, but what's like, the Rova, what's the Rechaim, the town square, has like sanctity? Says Gemara, yeah, I'll tell you why. Since the people daven over there in the town square, b'tainis and b'mamadais, by fast days and by mamadais. Where do we know this? And the Mishnah teaches in Mesechus Tainis Daf Tezvav Amud Aleph that if the people were fasting and davening and they weren't answered, the rain didn't come, so they take the Aron out to the city square. So you see, by Tainis, they would daven in the town square. Now, Mamadis Rashi finds this difficult. The Maimid, what was the Maimid? We said that the Jewish people were divided into 24 groups. To daven for the Kabbalah, just like Kahan was split into 24 groups, because you need a representation of the people itself. But by Mamadis, it says they would gather into their cities and they would read from Ma'aser B'Reishis. And the Brisa says in the Gemara that the people of the Maimid would go into the shul and they would sit and fast 4 out of the days of the week in shul. So what does it have to do with the town square? It says Rashi, maybe they had a shul that was permanent for them in the town square, and they would gather over there by the Mamadis. It says we learned in Bikurim in the 3rd parak that all the cities by the Maimid, they would gather to the city to the one that was the Rosh of the Maimid. He was like the head of that group. And they would sleep in the city square, and they wouldn't go into their homes, and they would sleep over there. And the one in charge would say, "Get up and go up to Tzion, to Hashem our God." So you learned that they would gather in the cities was in the town square. Now, but it was something that was temporary, where because this Maimid was not for another half a year, because they would divide into 24 groups, and there's around 48 weeks around in the year. But still, Rashi brings a girsa that not to have Mamadis, because maybe he says that the davening was not in the town square. But be that as it may, since there was some type of tefillas in the town square, whether it be by Tainias and Amadas or only by Tainias, so therefore that's why Rabbi Menachem Bar Yossi holds there is a sanctity. But Rabbanan, they say, no, Hahu Akra B'Alma. This that they would daven by a public fast, which how often was that? Or Mamadis, which only twice a year, it's not constant, not consistent, and therefore it does not give the town square any sanctity. And hence, they hold that you don't have to buy any higher sanctity when you sell the town square. Now, the Mishnah then said, Beis HaKnesses, going to the next higher level, town square is the lowest, and then next is a shul. If you sell a shul, likum teva. You have to use the money of the sales of the shul. Some you have dying communities out there in the Midwest, and they're selling the shul. So you have to take the money of the shul and buy an Aron Kodesh. So Amar Shmuel ben Nachmani, he explains and he qualifies his teaching. He says, we didn't learn even that you could even sell a shul. It's only a shul of a village. But a shul of a city, of a large town. Since people come from all over, they can't even sell it. Because it's considered the shul of the public, and everyone is considered its owners, and the city members themselves are not the owners to be able to go ahead and sell the shul. Which Tais explains what would be the reason for this. He says because since so many people come there to daven, even though they don't give anything for its building, still, since it was made for the das of a rabbin, so it has a severe level of sanctity, and you can't sell. That's one pshat. He says, or Tais says another pshat. Since many people actually do give, and for all its the uprunnings, chaydish geld, they go around and say everyone's coming from all over and giving. So therefore, so it's interesting these two pshat metaisis. How the psychology about a shul, could we sell it? Everyone comes there and uses the shul. One is pshat and saying because they even if they don't give, and one is if they do give. So it's interesting to see that ramification. But be that as it may, the city of the shul of a large city, there they come me'alma. You're not the owners, you're not the bailam of it, and you can't just sell it. However, Amar Rav Ashi says, the shul in Masa Machasya. Even though it's a minion factory, but everyone comes from all over to come and daven the shul. So since they're coming because of me, and as Tais explains it, according to the second shot he brings that, meaning even what they give money to the shul for for the electric and the ner lamur, all these different things. But since they do it for me, even if I want to, I could sell it. So again, it depends why people give the money. Generally, we say shal krach, you can't sell it because everyone's giving money. You're not the owners. Everyone's a part of this. But here, because the Rebbe, everyone's giving it for him. So I can't team even though it's coming from all over, because they're giving out das. It sounds like the hanacha over here is what the das was in these shuls. Who's the owner? He says, "Ich bin the Rebbe. It's my shul. I could do it as I want, even if people are giving money from all over." Now, the Gemara asks on this halacha of Rabbi Shmuel, who made this qualification, differentiating between a shul of a kfar, of a village, and of a city, Meisri from the following brisa. Amar Yehudi says, there was a story with the shul of the coppersmiths, where they used to have every every profession had their own shul, and they had this Shahim B'Yerushalayim. The coppersmiths, I guess, were dying out, or they were moving out of town. They said, we want to get out already. And they sold the shul to Rabbi Eliezer. And whatever he wanted to do, he did. The shul was his own place. Now the problem is, there, that was a krach. It was a city. And you told me, Rabbi Shmuel, that you can't sell a shul in the krach. Says the Gemara, that was a small shtibul, a small shul. The Inu Abdua, and they made it, and therefore it wasn't Mi'al Maka'asu, and therefore the coppersmiths were allowed to sell it to Rebbe Eliezer. But the Gemara continues asking now, Meisei from a following brisa, from an unrelated halacha, but still related to the concept of who's the owner. The pasuk says in Vayikra, when you're going to come to Eretz Canaan, that I'm going to give you as an achuzah, an inheritance, and I'm going to give a negav tzuras. Beveis Eretz Achuzasem, in the house of the land that you're inheriting, which means that you're going to find a neg in your house. And the pasuk there talks about what you have to do. Now, what it sounds like from the pasuk is Achuzasem etam negam. Only that which is an inheritance for you, that type of a house has a tumah of a nega. But then Yerushalayim etam negam. But Yerushalayim does not have, well, the homes in Yerushalayim do not have a tumah of negam. Why? Because Yerushalayim is not an achuzah. It's not an inheritance for you. As the Gemara is going to tell us shortly, that this town holds that Yerushalayim was not divided for the Shvatim. It's not in the portion of Yehuda and Binyamin, which are right in that area. So you don't own it. It's a global, I mean, that's what the world calls it. Yerushalayim is like the global city. It's not, no one has rights to it. It's everyone's place. So this town holds the same way, that it's not going to have Tumas Negoim because it's not Achuzaschim. It's not your inheritance. Which Amar Yehuda says, Ani lo shemati, says, I didn't hear that something should not have a Tumah of Negoim. Only the area of the temple itself. Why? Because that's a house of Kodshim. It's of Hektish. By Negoyim, the pasuk says, the one that to him it's his house, that's all we need to have. And if it's Hektish, which is what the base of Hektish is, it's not your house, so therefore it's not going to have Tumas Negoyim. But Yerushalayim, the homes in Yerushalayim are Tamei with Negoyim, because this Tana, this of Rabbi Yehuda, he holds that Yerushalayim was divided. It was given to specific Shvatim, and therefore it is called Achuzascha. Okay, but one thing we see is that according to Rabbi Yehuda, that he holds that Yerushalayim was divided amongst the Shvatim, that the only place that he says that's not going to have a Tumah of Negoim is the Makkah Mikdash Bilvad, only the area of the temple itself. Now the inference is, Habatik and Nasi is the Bati Midrashas, but the shuls and the Bati Midrashim in Yerushalayim, like all the other homes in the city of Yerushalayim, sounds like Armatam, and we'll have a Tumas Negoim. Wait a second. Amai, why does he have Tumas Negoim? Yerushalayim is a krach. Yerushalayim is a city that people come from all over. You told me that you are not the owner because it's a global ownership. And that's the reason why you told me why you're not able to sell. So then why would it have a Tumah then of Negoim? It's the same concept. Is it yours or not? Says Gemara, yeah, you have to amend the teaching. You should say it. Amar Bihudi says, Ani lo shemati, I didn't learn that something will not have a Tumah Negoim. I mean, he disagrees. It's not the whole Yerushalayim that won't have. But he says, I only heard Elamokim Mekudash Bavad. You have to change the Nekud over here. It's not Mikdash. It's like there's a shuruk, there's a sanctified place, meaning including a shul too. So you're right, the shuls in Yerushalayim don't have Tumas Negoyim because it's not Achuzaschem. Why not? He holds it's Neschaka. Because since it's a krach, every shul in the krach is not, you don't own it. The world owns it. And therefore, you can't sell it, and therefore it will not have Tumah of Negoyim. Okay, so that clarified, that cleared it up. It's not difficult on Shmuel. But once we brought this in, this machlekes Tanakam and Rabbi Yehuda, so the Gemara clarifies that machlekes. Mike and Evgeny, what's this machlekes Tanakam and Rabbi Yehuda regarding if the homes in Yerushalayim will have a Tumah of Negoyim or not? Says the Gemara Tanakam Asava, which we already alluded to, he holds Lo Nischaka Yerushalayim L'Shvatim. Yerushalayim was not divided amongst the tribes of Binyamin and Yehuda, and therefore it's owned by the world, and it's not a chazaskim. No single person, even though he lives in Yerushalayim, it's his home in Geula, he doesn't own it, it's not his, and therefore it's not going to be Negoyim, it's not a Chuzasa. Rabbi Yehuda said, it was no Yishchak, Yishlam, Yishvat, Yishlam was divided amongst the tribes. And says the Gemara, but put it on the Tanoi, it's the same machlokes we have in the following Tanoi. The Tanoi like in the Brisa, which first we quote one source that says like Rabbi Yehuda that it was divided, and we'll quote a source that says it wasn't divided. What's this? So the first Tanoi holds, Mahoy Bechelkei Shel Yehuda. What was in the portion of Shevet Yehuda? So it's Har Habayis. So when you come onto the Temple Mount, you come from the eastern side. That whole open area is called Har Habayis, the Temple Mount, which doesn't have any other name. And then going further, as you go from east to west, Halashachis, you have the chambers that are inside the area of the Chel, which is like the first gated in part. And you have Azaris, you have the 3 courtyards. There's actually 3 Azaris. There's the Ezus Nashim, which is a very large open area. The first part you come into the temple complex. Then you have the Ezus Yisrael, which is an area of 11 Amas where Yisrael is allowed to go in within the gate. And then you have, beyond that, towards the west, you have the Ezus Koyanim, which is another 11 Amas, which is the area between where a Yisrael could go to and the outer Mizbeach. So those were all in Shevet Yehuda. Now, Mahai Bechelkei Shel Binyamin, what was in the portion of Binyamin? So coming from the west is Ulam, is the antechamber, the Heichel and the sanctuary itself, Beis Kacheh Kachim and the Kacheh Kachim. These are all on the west. But now there's an area between what we mentioned from Yehuda and Binyamin, is the Makam HaMizbeach. We didn't mention whose that is. That's 32 Amas. And we have also the area between the antechamber, which is the opening of the Beis Hamikdash temple, the structure itself, and Mizbeach, which is also 22 Amas. It doesn't say whose that is. So now it goes and explains. Now there was a strip of land that was from the portion, coming out from the portion of Yehuda, and went into the portion of Binyamin, and it's on that strip that the Mizbeach was built, which now it's coming to teach you that only that strip was for Shevet Yehuda. But the northern part of the Mizbeach and the southern and the western part was all from Shevet Binyamin, which the Gemara Mizrachim explains that Yehuda actually only had that strip by the eastern part, which was the place of the foundation of the Mizbeach. And actually that's why the Mizbeach did not have the eastern foundation, because that was not part of Shevet Binyamin, it's actually part of Shevet Yehuda. So actually all the Mizbeach was actually built in Shevet Binyamin, but there was a strip that by Yehuda literally was on the side of where the foundation is, and therefore there was no foundation. Now, Binyamin, the son of Yaakov Avinu, the righteous, he saw with Ruach HaKodesh that this is ultimately going to be like this, and therefore every single day he was in pain to swallow up that part that can open the ganze Mizbeach in Man Chaylik, and then Yehuda nimmt a kleine Stickel do. Like it says the passing the Varm. It says Chayfalav Kol Hayoim, like a person that's in pain, like he like scratches his garments like because he's in pain. He's like he's like pulling his jacket and whatever, and that's what it was. That's a chayful kol yom. All day he was scratching himself. The figure of Binyamin merited and he became the host for the divine presence, which, like the pasuk says, a ben kesef of shachim, that God rests between his shoulders, meaning that the Aron HaKodesh was in his portion. But one thing we see from here is that Yerushalayim, even to the Temple Mount, was divided amongst the Shvatim. We see that Yehuda and Binyamin were the ones who had divided Yerushalayim, and then the pinnacle of that was on the temple complex. But V'haitan Nesaver, which is how the Tanakama of the first Brisa held, that no loy nischak Yerushalayim Shvatim. Yerushalayim was not divided amongst the tribes, and that's the Tanoi, which we said is Machlekes Tanoim, which is how we explained before, that hold that this is machlekes, if it's going to have Tumas Nagoyim in the Helms of Yerushalayim, depends if it's Nischak or not. This one holds like the Tanakama that it wasn't. Why? The Tanakama in the Brisa. This time it says, Ein Maskirim, the homeowners cannot rent out their batim, their homes, for let's say people that come, Alila Regel, people come to make a pilgrimage to Yerushalayim, they cannot sell their homes in Yerushalayim. Now they'd have to give it to them for free, and they could come in and they could sleep in these people's homes. Why? Nishayin Yerushalayim. Because the Tanakama says it's not theirs. Like we said, because I mean, you're just squatting over here. Everyone lives in Yerushalayim is squatting, but it's not. You don't own it, and if you cannot charge. He says actually, you can't even charge for the beds, which like Taisa brings from Rabbi Yosef, that he holds that since the ground, which is where the beds are, is not designated for these owners, so they don't have the rights to either rent a full rental for the beds. But since the beds are movable items, That's why we said in the Mishnah that they take Oyres HaKadosh and they take the hides of their Kabbanas because of that. But like it's saying over here, therefore the people, the balabat, the guests that come and bring the Karban Toida and Shlamim, that the hides go to the owners, the host would forcibly take those hides because they couldn't charge even for the beds. But Kimstin, Nitzman, Man Betten doing whatever, they don't pay anything, so they would forcibly take the hides. Which Abai says, anyway, what we learn from that is it's the proper conduct, the mishpik inish gufa, that a person should leave his earthenware jug that he had used, umashcha, and the hide of, let's say, slaughtered animal, bushpiz, leave it by the host. Meaning leave over something so that a sign of appreciation, where even though he's not charging you anything, usually they couldn't charge according to this mandam because now he doesn't own it, but leave over something that you come with a platter or something, and you even though it's for your kids, leave it over them. Leave over something that they could, as a sign of appreciation. Now, a qualification of this halacha, going back really to the primary halacha of our Mishnah, which we said that the monies and the sale of these items, of the city square and of the shul, and they have to be upgraded in sanctity, not downgraded. The Gemara makes an important qualification. Amar Rava. He says, Loishan, we didn't learn that you cannot downgrade the monies from their sanctity, and that the shul itself retains some of its significance, even by the guy who bought the shul, which are similar to svarim, which we said that when you sell svarim, you have to purchase a sefer Torah, and obviously that person who bought the svarim of the big miksum, he has to treat it with the sanctity that it deserves. So Rava says that's that's only if the 7 board members of the city didn't sell it in the presence of the people of the city itself, meaning with the permission of the people. But let's say the 7 board members of the city sold these items in the presence and with the permission of the people of the city, then actually it removes the sanctity from the object and from the money, and you're permitted to do with it as you desire. And that's actually what the Gemara is going to shortly ask. Even from Ravashi, when he had this big mound of a destroyed shul, what could he plant it? But obviously we see that when you're selling in general, the monies and the house, it retains its sanctity. But if it was done b'maimed anshe ha'ir with the 7 taivei air, then that still has a contingency base. Then actually it doesn't have these restrictions. Then even as a contingency base, lamishta shichra. Even if, let's say, you want to take the monies that you sold the shul, and you want to buy beer to drink, and you want to start a shalom zacha gemach, and you're buying beer with this monies, Shabbatami, that's okay, because they have the right to go ahead and strip it from all its sanctity, and therefore that doesn't have the same limitations as when you're making a regular sale. Now the Gemara brings a story which we just referred to from Rashi. Ravina Havala Tila the Beknishta. He had any destroyed house is called a mound, like Bahisa Tel Olam. It's like a destroyed house. You have a big mound of wood and everything. So he had this of a shul, a destroyed shul. So also coming to Ravashi, Amalei says to him, Ma'ula Mizra, could I go and just use this old shul as for planting? Where we buy when we build the shul next door, like, could we just, this big man, could we just plant nice trees over here? Well, what can we do over here? So Amalei says, Zil Zavni Meshevet Hebeir. He says, okay, go ahead, buy this property from the 7 board members, in the presence of the people of the city with their permission. Go ahead and plant it. Like we said that, although generally you can't do things like that because it has to be upgraded in sanctity, but here where it's then you could do whatever you want. You could even buy beer from the, probably today's days would be something else, not necessarily beer, but it'd be something in that category, and you're allowed to do that because it's with the Shiva Teva here.
So you're saying 2 things. You're saying first, if it's B'maimed Shiva Teva here, that not only the property is Pakim Ketushus, but also from the money that they received.
Yeah, that's what Rashi says. That it's both the funds and the item itself, which would remove any sanctity from the things itself, and therefore the transfer and the original item, don't have that sanctity. And that Taisa elsewhere says that certain halachas are only when it's destroyed, like we have over here. When it's built, it might have a different halacha. But the Gemara brings another story that Rami Bar Abba have a korbani bei knishta. So he was building a shul, and Habahi knishta atika, and there was an old shul, and this would be very appropriate in the situation we just described. Let's say we're building the shul next door, and I have the shul over here. So Habahi lamis today. So what he wanted to do is he wanted to demolish the current shul, and V'lasui livni b'kashurim, and they wanted to take bricks and beams from the old shul to put into the new shul. Right? Let's say we have this beautiful floor, and we want to build the new floor, so they want to rip out the floor to put into the new one. To bring it over there. Now, Yosef became a buddy, but he was sitting and he was asking the following shayla. He says, wait a second. There's a halacha from Rav Chizda and Baba Bas and Perka Shukman. The Rav Chizda, he says, now destroy a shul, and the bana bekinishta until you first build the new shul. So, wait a second, it would sound like you cannot do that, but he was clarifying, he was wondering, he said, Hasam Mishim Shiyusa, maybe over there because of negligence. Because what happens is that you might destroy the old shul, and then you give up because you're an idealistic young man, and you want to go ahead and build a shul, and everyone's like, yeah, build a shul, and then the second you get involved, everyone just drops out, no one's doing anything, and then you're going to give up, and you're not going to build another one. So you're going to be without any shul because you destroyed the old shul, and you didn't build a new shul yet. So therefore says Rabbi Chizda, no, you're never allowed to destroy the old shul until you have the new shul built. But Kihai Gavin, in the situation over here, where the whole reason why I'm destroying the old shul is only to build a new shul. So my word halacha be, maybe I could rip out the beams and the floor and the svarim shang, all these different things, and move it to the new shul, and it wouldn't be a violation of Rabbi Chizda halacha because the whole purpose of destroying the old is to build the new. So also coming to the Papa, he came in front of the Papa of Asala and says, no, you're not do it. He came into the Papa of Asala and says, no, you're not do it. You're not allowed to take off from this shul. Even if it's to build the new shul next door, you couldn't take away the pieces because it has to first be built and then you could take apart the old shul. Now, related, Amar Rava says, Habe Kanishta, this shul, this relates back to the halacha of our Mishnah, Chilufa v'zvuna shari, to transfer the sanctity of the shul into something else, or to sell it by transferring it onto monies, so then the shul goes out from its sanctity to the utility of the item that you be using the funds for, so that would be permitted. But agura umashkoina asr, but to rent it and to use it as collateral, that would be forbidden. Says what's the problem? Because it's still in its sanctity. It's you can't use a shul for mundane purposes. When you sell it, it loses its sanctity because the sanctity is being transferred to the funds. That you could do. But to rent a shul or and Tais discusses that we see elsewhere to the contrary, that you could. So it depends. He says if you're using it as collateral for an individual, that's a disgrace because it has its current sanctity. If you're using it for another tzibur, another rabbin, that would be permitted. But selling is okay because you're basically transferring the sanctity and therefore it's not a disgrace. But when you're renting a shul or collateral, so then the shul is still a shul, but it's still being used in mundane purpose, that would be disgraceful. So to livnei nami, regarding the bricks of a shul, if you want to transfer it onto like bartering it or selling it, that's okay because it's the sanctity is being moved to somewhere else and it's not disgracing the bricks. But to lend it out, that would be awesome because it's the brick of hektish and now it's being used for some other purpose. Now, it says the Gemara, Hanamil about tikti. That's only when these bricks were already built in the shul, which fell out, and now it's already had the sanctity, it's part of a shul. Now it would have these problems about, let's say, lending it out. But if it's new bricks, which are made for the purposes of building for a shul, less lamba, that's not a problem to go ahead and lend it out for others. Because as the Gemara explains, even according to the one that says in Mesechus Sanhedrin that Memzayin base, when you weave a garment for a dead person, the burial shrouds, even the one that says Hazmon and Milsi, that just preparing it is something significant. And by just designating it for Tachrich and for burial shrouds, it becomes forbidden to have Hana, which the Gemara learns out from Eglah Rufa, Sham, that just like Eglah Rufa is Asbana, so too are things from a mess considered Asbana, and the mess never wore this burial shroud, but since it was designated, it's going to be forbidden. But even that man, the Amr, Hanamili would say this only when you're weaving a garment for a dead person where the only thing that was lacking was weaving, and once it's woven, so it's already fit to be put onto the dead person. So that's very prepared. And that preparation here would make the thing forbidden. Allah over here by the bricks where it's lacking building it into the wall. And therefore, by the bricks of a shul, that would be the equivalent of kitavi la'aradami. That would be like if you only have spun thread, which is ready to be woven, but it's not even woven yet, that v'lekaman da'amar. No one would say that in that situation that's really considered as Hazman is already prepared, And therefore, these bricks, which were designated for the shul, like we had out there on the porch when they were making these floors, that's the board that was sitting out there for a while. So that wouldn't be considered hazmana milsi, and everyone would agree that you could lend it out if, let's say, someone needed it for private construction, you'd be able to because it wasn't part. But if you took these and then one of these boards fell out and then they had been used already, so that would have the halacha. If you could go ahead and you wouldn't be able to lend it, but you'd be able to like sell it. Now, what's with matana, says the Gemara? What's if, let's say, the people of the city, they gift their shul to someone that we have someone living upstairs. We say, you know what, you were a good customer, a good tenant. We're going to give you the shul as a gift. So, pligi b'revach b'rabina. So that's a machlokes. Chad asa v'chad shur. One says that you're not allowed to do that. One says it's permitted. So the Gemara explains. Man da asa, the one who says you're not allowed to, is because b'hai tifka kedushasa. It's just like when we said, just like you're not allowed to use collateral for a shul for collateral or to lend it because it still has its sanctity and now it's being used mundane. Here also, when you're going to gift it to this person, what's removing its sanctity? It's still a shul. How could he use it for his own? He's going to start making like a bar night over here and then this is shul. How can he do that? But Amanda Shor, the one that says permitted, is ilav the havale hanomine. If it wasn't that they had benefit from this person, labi yovle, they wouldn't have gifted it to him. So essentially, the gifting is like a sale. So they say, you gave shiurim over here. We want you to have this shul, saying, here, it's yours. Right, here's the keys. So why are they giving it to me? Of course, because they had some anah. So that's essentially what a sale is. It's maybe maybe it's intangible, but it's like a sale, and therefore it is being paka kedushasa because it's taking effect on something, not on money. But it's taking effect on some bartering that's happening over here. That they says, hey, Schwartzberg, you could have the shul because you came all these times and you benefit us. We don't need it. We have a building next door, nicer, bigger, so you can do what you want. So it'll be pocket kedushas because it's going on that hana. Now, related discussion regarding the halacha of our Mishnah. Tashmishe mitzvah, which are items that were used in the service of a mitzvah. So those are nizrakin. In halacha, basic halacha, you could throw it away. Tashmish kedusha, the items that were used for items of sanctity, and that's the reason why we're bringing it here, because essentially the halachas of our Mishnah were kedusha. There's mitzvah and there's kedusha. And that's v'maylam b'kodesh, v'meridin. It comes to inyani kedusha, so those items are used for sanctity, nignos, and they have to be buried. They have to be hidden away. Ve'elein tashmish mitzvah. What are considered items that are used in mitzvah? So very simply, sukkah, lulav, shayfer, tzitzis, all these things you can throw it out. Obviously, we don't do it disgracefully. We wrap it up, isn't that? But you can throw it out. What's considered items that were used in the service of sanctity? So those are deluskame, which is like basically like a container that you put a sefer inside of it, like a container of svarim, or tefillin, or mezuzahs, or v'tikshal sefer Torah, which these are all containers of the sefer Torah, over a nartik shal tefillin, which Rashi is tik and nartik, which is the same word, just tick and nartik. It's a lot of ticks, but it's all the same thing. It's just that tick is on something that's long, and nartik is on something that's small. So you have a smaller case for your tefillin than you have for the sefer there. And but it's the same, and there's straps, which interesting. Taisa says it sounds like from here that the dalet and the yud and the kesher and the knots of the ritzua are not considered actual letters, and it's not part of the halacha b'Sinai like the shin is in the bottom, because we're calling the ritzuas only as tashmishe mitzvah and not tashmishe kedusha. So they're not considered as oisius, because really shakai is spelled out in the tefillin. You have the shin on the tefillin shadoshin, you have the dalet in the back of the tefillin shadoshin, you have the yud on the tefillin, the kesher of the tefillin shalyad. It sounds like Taisa says that the brisket oven. This is what's made of about mitzvah on this Taisis with the. But if it's considered the oisius or not, this makes sound like it's not, because it's tashmid. You could take the ritzuas and you could throw it away because it's tashmid shemitzah. It's not tashmid kedusha. And if it was, it should be considered as tashmid kedusha because it has the oisius of Hashem's name on the ritzuas. Now Amar Rava, he says, Medei Shabbamin, says in the beginning I said that high kursaya, that a bima made out of wood is tashmish to tashmishu. It's not used in the service of kedusha. It serves something else that serves in that, because as we have over here on the beam over here, we have a cloth on top of the bima, and then you put the sefer Torah on top of that. So it's not serving directly the item of kedusha. It's not even tashmish kedusha. It's tashmish de tashmish. It serves something that serves something of kedusha. and therefore b'shari, and it would be permitted to use. Now, given the chazina the meisabel sebetar, since I saw that sometimes they actually take away, they're cleaning it or something, and that they use it to put the sebetar on the bima directly. I mean, I said tashmash kedushu that no, it's considered the service of a holy item, and therefore us it would be forbidden like a tashmash kedusha. Similarly, Ba'amar Rav, another teacher from Rav, it says, Maresh Amina says, in the beginning I used to say, the high parisa, Machlekes Rashi and Taisus, Rashi says it's a curtain that you hang up around the aron from within. Taisus from without, but like you like line the aron kaidish with a curtain. So I used to say, says Rav, that tashmishu, because it's serving the aron, which the aron itself is serving the Sefer Torah. Tais finds that difficult because he says, no, that's actually, then it would be closer to the Sefer Torah. So he says it's actually a curtain on the outside. But either way, but once I saw that sometimes they would wrap the curtain beneath the Sefer Torah, or Manchi Sefer Leven, they would put the svarim directly on it. I mean, a Tashmash Kedusha also, I would say, oh, no, you see it serves directly to the Sefer Torah, and therefore, again, it would be forbidden like Tashmish Kedusha. Another teaching from Ramad Ave says, Hey Tevusa, the Aron, the earput, which it got ruined and it started coming undone. So, like, you know, the ones you have in the bungalow colony in the camp, you know, these wooden Aron Kaidish and it's starting to get klapped. So, me'evet tebes utrasi. So, if you want to make a small Aron from the larger one because it broke apart and from the two doors only one door works and you can make it smaller. So, sorry, that's okay. You can make a smaller Aron out of it. But kursaya, if you want to make from the Aron into a bima, you say, hey, you know, if we took this Aron, we just put it on made it horizontal, we could make like a good bima out of it. So that would be forbidden again because you're downgrading the sanctity from an Aron to a bima because a bima is not as constant as housing a Sefer Torah as an Aron is. The Sefer Torah is always in the Aron. A bima is only muntigadonishtig and whatever other times, therefore that would be downgraded, you can't do that. Another teaching from Amar Rav, he says, High priest of the Bala. Regarding the curtains of the Aron, if it got worn out, so lemevdi priest l'sifrei shari. If you want to make it, let's say, to be curtains to wrap svarim, that would be permitted for a Sefer Torah. But l'chumashim, which their svarim were made in scrolls, and they would have each chumash by itself, so that's also that's forbidden because again that would be downgrading somebody that served the whole Sefer Torah to make it only for one of the 5 svarim. It's going to be forbidden. Another teaching, Amar Rava, says hani zavili. That's like containers. The chumash of chumashim, the kamtari, which is like a case of the sifri of svarim, tashmish kedushin. You know, those are considered that they serve items of sanctity, and menagnazin, and therefore they have to be buried. Says Mapshita. What I mean, of course, it's tashmish kedusha. Says these containers, they're not made for the honor of the Sefer Torah of the svarim. They're just there to protect it. They're just items that you use to support it. Kamash Lana, so it's saying that even though it's not like necessarily about coveting a thing, but still, since it serves the Kedusha item, it still has that sanctity. The Gemara brings a story. There was the people that had came from Rome to Mechaiza. That's where they settled, as the Jews are always traveling all over, and then this group came there and they made for themselves a shul. There was a room on the side of the shul, where, you know, in these old towns, everything was in the shul, and the place where they made the tahara for the mess, where they would keep him over, they was there until he was being buried. They would keep him there in the room off of the shul. Now, the habamachas bames, there was one time that there was actually a dead person there. Now, the thing is, kahanim wanted to come down in the shul, but they couldn't come into shul because Tumas oil travels from one room to another room if it's under the same oil. And there was an opening from the shul to that room, as a mission teaching all this in the third paragraph. So also they came and told Rabbi, says the Kana want to come in and daven. They can't daven because there's a mess in the next room. So he said to them, okay, lift up the aron from its place, and let's go. Put it there by the doorway. So that's a wooden vessel that's meant to be stationary, to be in one place. Aron kodesh you don't usually move. And when you have a wooden vessel that's made to be stationary, like a heavy item, it actually does not contract tumah. Why not? So Rashi tells us because the pasuk that talks about the tumah of vessels it equates a wooden vessel to a sackcloth. Remember laws of Tumah, like it says, "V'chokli eitz, a beged or sack." Now, just like a sack is something that's movable, so too a wooden vessel has to be movable to be makabel tumah. But if it's a heavy stationary object, it's not makabel tumah. Now, hence, not only is this aron not going to be makabel tumah, it's going to be v'chaitzim of tumah. It's going to now interpose. It's going to block the tumah, because anything that's makabel tumah doesn't block. But if it's not makabel tumah, it blocks the tumah from coming in. So great, move the aron kodesh in front of that doorway, and then they come coming down in shul. So I'm going to but the rabbi says, yeah, but sometimes they do move this aron. When they put the sefer Torah on it, like a bima, and therefore this aron is something that is moved when it's full and empty, which is the qualification that we learned from a sack. So therefore it is makabel tumah, therefore it cannot be chaitzis. Says Rabbi, then you're right. If that's the case, it's not possible. And it seems like the Gemara is bringing this story just to illustrate the function of certain items like the aron in regards to what it was used for other things. And he says again, if it's moved, then you're right, you can't use it to block out the thing. Amma Zutra, continuing with the previous theme, says mitbechei svarim. If you have the containers of the svarim, even that of a sefer Torah, let's say the mantle, shabolo, if it got worn out, so you can make it as burial shrouds for a person who has no one to bury him. Because we said you have to bury these things. That's how you'll bury it, with that mes mitzvah. Also, Bama Rabbi says sefer Torah shabal. If you have a sefer Torah got worn out, going to nice etzel tamachachim, you bury it, you hide it next to the burial of the tamachachim. And afilu shana halachas. And even if he didn't serve Talmidei Chacham in Shas and Gemara, he just went Mishnayos and Beraisis, even that is enough to be considered as a Talmid Chacham to bury the worn out sefer Torah next to this person. Which Amar Navacha by Yaakov, it says, but b'kli cheres, it should be in an earthenware vessel. Because the Pasuk says in Yommi, you've been asatim b'kli cheres, that you should put in an earthenware vessel. L'manyam do yom ram, that stays for a long time. We want the sefer Torah to be maintained, and then we put it in the kli cheres. Now, related to the Mishnah, it's not no vav. It's Amar Papi Mishmei, and the gear says the Rava, continuing which we were talking about selling a shul. So he says the Kanishta, we say it has to be upgraded. When you sell a shul, you buy sefer Torah. So to sell a shul, to make a beis medrash out of a shul, so that's shari, that's permitted. But if you want to take a beis medrash, you have a yeshiva, a masifta, beis medrash, you want to make it into a shul, so that's forbidden. But he says the exact opposite. He says no, you can make a beis medrash into a shul, but you cannot make a shul into beis medrash. He says, if you think about and it's logical to say the halacha is like a papi, that a beis medrash is greater than a shul, and you make a shul in the beis medrash. Why? Because Amr Shimon Levi says basic knesset, mutlasa says beis medrash. You can make a shul into a beis medrash, which Taisa says from here it seems like halacha is like Rabbi Shimon Levi when he disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan, because what do you bring a raya to Rav Papi from Rabbi Shimon Levi? But there's a well-known machlekes Rabbi Shimon Levi and Rabbi Yochanan elsewhere in Shas. What's considered a bayis hagadol, which the Gemara is going to bring later on this Amid, of what's greater, tefillah or Torah, and it's machlekes. So what do you bring Rabbi Shimon Levi? Bring Rabbi Yochanan. Obviously, because you're passing like Rabbi Shimon Levi, and since he says you can make a beis medrash out of a shul, so obviously Shema no. What we refer from this is that the halacha of a papi, that if you're selling a shul, you could go ahead and buy a beis medrash, because that's actually upgrading. People sitting and learning is greater than the shul, and therefore you can do that not like a way of public. So thank you for any time.